A silver lining and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Mark and the Millennials. We are calling it A Silver Lining, and that's because, of course, so many people think that the Republican Party failed nationwide, and there are plenty of silver linings after Tuesday's election. But before we go there, I wanted to give you some updates on the election in my own county, because every county is different. As I said, every state is different. Every township is different. And in my county, we had a couple of contentious races. One was for school board. And the Democrats took the school board over in my county, 5 or 6 years ago. And initially, no one really cared and thought it mattered because they were nonpartisan races. But then the Democrats decided to coordinate nationwide and implement the crazy CRT stuff from the school board level. And it was coordinated nationwide, as I said. And this particular election cycle in my county, we had a red wave. And we were able to sweep out the 2 members who were up for re-election. There are 5 on the school board, to be fair, and 3 are still left-wing Democrats. But the 2 positions that were up this election, the Republicans took over those 2 positions. So that's a good thing, and I'm hoping that you had the same experience in your county or your township and or your state. Also in my county, kind of as a funny aside, we had a sheriff's race in our county, and we had the Democrat versus the Republican, of course. In my county, we have sheriffs run from the position of a party, and they are elected. I actually like that because you can switch out your sheriff if you don't like your sheriff, if you don't think they're doing a good job. I think it's a nice way of being able to determine if you are happy with the safety of the community and the way the community is being policed. I think that's extremely important. Nonetheless, just a funny aside, the Republicans' last name is Cox and the Democrats' last name is Johnson. So yes, that was the election for sheriff in my county. So kind of an interesting aside there. We won't add anything to that. So this podcast listeners, is called A Silver Lining. And by the way, I forgot to say this. I had a school board member who is the far left school board member yell at me for 5 minutes at one of the precincts on Tuesday. This school board member yelled at me for 5 minutes because she said that I was not in any way, shape, or form trying to improve the school board by helping the 2 Republicans win, that parents had plenty of opportunity to express their discomfort and or displeasure of what was happening in the public school system. And they could do so at the school board meeting. And she always allowed there to be public comment, which, by the way, simply wasn't true. Our school board is still limiting parents to 10 per meeting. No more than 10 per meeting may give comments. And they have all of 2 minutes to give their comments. And parents can't ask questions of the school board members. So basically, it's you as a parent going in, speaking for 2 minutes, which is not enough time to get your point across, and then you're summarily dismissed. Once you get to parent number 10, they're done with you as parents. See you later. And so I was yelled at by this individual saying that they were not trying to limit parent input with 10 parents being able to speak. Amazing, amazing stuff. So next up, podcast listeners, a silver lining that is correct. Daily Caller says that there is a little noticed silver lining emerging in the wake of the midterm elections. The much-touted red wave may have proved a bust Tuesday night, but a silver lining has emerged for Republicans. Before the election even occurred, a Wall Street Journal poll showed Republicans making gains among Black and Latino voters. While only 8% of Black voters cast their ballot for Donald Trump in 2020, 17% said they would vote for a Republican for Congress in 2020. Quote, I think that this could be a paradigm shift election where Republicans are not only making inroads with Latino voters, But they're now making inroads with the African-American vote, said John Anzalone, who conducted the survey. The day after the election, the Wall Street Journal noted that while in totality, Hispanic and Black voters continued to vote solidly for Democrats, no doubt about that, Black voters in the election, and particular young Black voters, have started to shift to the right. According to the Wall Street Journal's electoral data, Black voters aged 18 to 44 shifted 22 points towards Republicans, while Black voters in general shifted 15 points to the GOP. Democrats have taken the Black community for granted and dropped the ball on messaging to Black Americans, Janiyah Thomas, RNC's Black Media Affairs Manager, told the Daily Caller News Foundation in November. Republicans have been making inroads with Black voters by showing up in their communities and listening to the Black voters at RNC community centers. Black America deserves a change in leadership, and that starts on November 8th. So, folks, while I think this is a silver lining, and it's obviously a good silver lining, I would tell you that in my own state, we have one Black state legislator that is elected, okay? One. And her name is Brenda Cheatham. And we have no Black members who are Republicans elected to the United States Congress or the United States Senate. In the Maryland legislature, we have one Black Republican elected. And guess what? The Democrats spent a ton of money to unelect this individual, and they were successful. So a red wave in my county, but there were other counties in the same state that did not have a red wave. So I really think it depends on the area. You can't just like generalize and say, oh, that state is, it's the whole state. No, things are much more complicated than that. And I think this is important about the silver linings thing. In my state, in a county where this one Black Republican was elected, she was unelected because the Democrats focused on that particular race because they really wanted to get rid of her. And on the other hand, there were other counties where Democrats didn't even bother to put up a candidate against Republicans because they knew they wouldn't win and they didn't want to waste their resources. So all of these things matter. They're varying reasons why some states you had success and some states you did not. But here's what we can tell you that is universal. And that is that mail-in ballots, by and large, are probably here to stay. Look, you've heard me. I know what you're going to say. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're saying that. Well, I don't like mail-in ballots for all the obvious reasons and for all the reasons that I've said many times before in this podcast. Anytime that you interrupt the chain of custody of a ballot and other people get to touch it other than yourself, then that is problematic. And that is exactly what mail-in ballots do. They break the chain of custody of your ballot. Nonetheless, mail-in ballots are very likely, in many states at least, if not all states, they're probably here to stay. So in the Epoch Times, warnings of red mirage ignore the real problem with mail-in ballots. This is actually a really good article. I have to tell you, initially, a year or so ago, I wasn't a big fan of the Epoch Times. It's actually one of the few newspapers out there that's putting out news that is interesting enough to read. And it's not because it's on the right. It's not because it's on the left. It's because they're actually talking about providing you an analysis of what has happened and providing some level of investigative journalism, something that is, of course, missing from most news outlets. While Democrats and some election observers have raised concerns about the possibility of a so-called red mirage, an appearance of Republican leads in midterm races on election night that will dissipate when mail-in ballots are counted, the real problems with mail-in voting are of a different nature. Election experts have told the Epoch Times. Early voting by mail promotes tribalisms within politics and encourages people to vote without really knowing all that they could about the candidates and the issues, one scholar said. Some of those raising concerns about the use and misuse of early and mail-in voting have invoked a familiar narrative about Trump-influenced so-called election deniers who are allegedly hostile to and seek to undermine democracy itself. But the real problems with mail-in voting have little to do with the possibility of dishonest attempts to parlay the appearance of victory into actual victory, and more to do with the replacement of the traditional institution of voting and all its civil and cultural implications with a remote process, little attuned to the vagaries of campaigns and the substance of the issues in the lead up to the election day, election observers say. So the article continues on about mail-in voting, and it's really interesting because it says early voting has its proponents, such as David Carlucci, a former New York State senator who now works as a political consultant, who emphasizes that he sees it as a role in a fair and transparent election process. Mail-in voting, quote, is necessary for providing all Americans the opportunity to have their voices heard in elections. Sure. But here's the problem. You have mail-in voting in some places, like in Pennsylvania, where it actually started in September. Can you imagine? You have an election on November 8th, but mail-in voting in Pennsylvania started in September. And you have this guy who is literally almost brain dead, John Fetterman, who never was heard from in an actual compare and contrast type debate, and rarely went and spoke in public. Maybe he had, a few like campaign private events where the media wasn't allowed in. And then finally, of course, this guy wins. Fetterman does, because no one hardly really understands what he believes in, or that he can't even properly function because so many ballots were already cast in September and October. So mail-in ballots, I believe, are here to stay because the Democrats know that it works for them. It works for them because they can ballot harvest literally millions and millions of mail-in ballots. They can go around and collect them house by house. That's ballot harvesting. And then the Democrats can then drop them in drop boxes and make sure that way they have the numbers necessary to overwhelm the election day voters. And this is exactly what we're seeing across the country. I told you earlier in this podcast that in my county, we had a red wave, but in the county next to mine, they had a small red wave, which is now being overcome by mail-in ballots, because the mail-in ballots weren't counted on the same day. Oh no. The people that won election day, according to the election results, are now really close to losing. We don't have the full results yet, but we're pretty sure those individuals are going to lose, so that the red wave was actually stopped in the county right next to mine because of ballot harvesting. Democrats know this works. They know ballot harvesting works. They are going to continue this. They're going to continue moving in this direction to try to make it harder and harder for people to actually decide whether a ballot was cast by the individual that actually was alleged to have cast it. And this is why so many people don't trust our elections. I know we've spoken about this before, but I have clips to prove this to you. Here's Andrea Mitchell of NBC News. She's actually on MSNBC, but it's the same thing. It's NBC. And she's talking to Senator Claire McCaskill, who's a former senator from Missouri. Andrea Mitchell poses a question about the fact that Arizona still does not know the results of the key gubernatorial and U.S. Senate elections. Listen how Andrea Mitchell puts it. Listen to this. We have the clip. Here it is.
Let's talk about all the room for mischief making, because we saw in Arizona last time and in Nevada, the longer it takes to process and count, the more people, like the guy in Mar-a-Lago, can say, and Kerry Lake already was saying even before the election, well, that just proves, that there's all these evildoers, and then you had the ridiculous circus in Arizona of all of those recounts and, you know, the audits and whatever was going on there. So this surprises me. It was surprising that we got the Pennsylvania results last night. None of us expected that.
So, did you hear that? Andrea Mitchell is saying, it's surprising we got the Pennsylvania results so early. Well, they got them early because the Democrats ballot harvested in Pennsylvania. And since a Democrat was leading, or they thought the Democrat was going to win, they made daggone sure that they announced that the election night. But in Arizona, where two Republicans in two very important races could potentially win, somehow the votes aren't counted. And because they're not counted in Arizona, Andrea Mitchell's saying, well, you know, the Republicans were ridiculous in 2020 by actually saying that there was some sort of conspiracy going on because ballots had not yet been counted. Well, folks, in what modern society do you not count ballots and know the results of an election the election day? That's the whole purpose of election day, is to know what the results are on election day or election night. Still the same thing. It's the same day, right? You haven't gone to the next day or 2 days later. But that's how crooked MSNBC Andrea Mitchell is. Well, when Republicans can't, the Republicans, you know, all they do is think that there's something wrong with, you know, counting these ballots. They just don't want you to count the ballots. No, that's not true. We want you to count the ballots. We want you to do it the day of. And we want you to vote in person. And we want ballot harvesting to stop because it is illegal and it creates all kinds of questions about the validity of who actually cast those ballots. And we do find it to be really odd that the Democrats who win in ballot harvested elections are announced right away when they think they're going to win. But when they think Republicans are going to win in ballot harvested elections, the Democrat also ballot harvested, they can't seem to figure out who won the election. So Clara McCaskill, former senator of Missouri, responds to Andrea Mitchell. And listen to Clara McCaskill's response. Amazing. Here it is.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the election deniers have a problem here because in Nevada, the Republican is ahead. So therefore, the late counting ballots are going to be, oh, they're no good, this is all rigged. But in Arizona, the candidate is behind. So the late counting ballots there are going to be peachy swell. This is keen. Isn't this great? This is working wonderfully, at least from Kari Lake's perspective, based on the analysis of folks who are looking at this very, very closely.
So that's Clara McCaskill saying that Republicans want it both ways, that in Nevada, you have Laxalt, who is ahead currently, but the ballots that have been ballot harvested, and put in drop boxes have not yet been counted in full, and therefore Republicans are okay with Laxalt being ahead and there being more ballots to count. But that's not the case with Republicans in Arizona. Folks, Clara McCaskill and Andrea Mitchell couldn't be more wrong about the way Republicans see both of those races. Republicans see both of those races identical. That is to say, they see the Nevada race and the Arizona race as being identical races where you have ballot harvesting that took place and you have an attempt to draw out election day to election week or election 2 weeks until you get the result that you want. Republicans don't trust that. They don't understand why we can't have it settled the day of the election. Doesn't matter who's ahead or who's behind. Tell us definitively who won the day of the election. That's what Republicans want. And if you cannot do it with mail-in ballots, then don't do mail-in ballots. Pretty straightforward. That is the Republican position. It is a reasonable position. And the fact that the news media, NBC, doesn't even understand that this is problematic demonstrates to you why there is so much civil unrest in the country and the threat of more civil unrest by people who aren't confident in the elections. Who in their right mind across the world, the planet, would be confident in elections when you don't know who won for days or for weeks? All because of the same thing: mail-in ballots. I'm sorry, and you've heard us say this before, in Florida, they were able to figure it out. But for some reason, in the swing states and in those really important states that determine the outcome of who controls Congress, for some reason, those states can't seem to figure it out. And so Republicans are quite consistent, Andrea Mitchell, about what they want to see. They want to see elections decided the day of the election. That is a perfectly reasonable thing to request. Perfectly reasonable thing. And if you also want to find out why Republicans believe in the day of the election, there's a dead guy that won in Pennsylvania. Folks, think about this. This is directly connected to what we're talking about with ballot harvesting. In Pennsylvania, as we said earlier, you have mail-in ballots and voting occurring in September and October, like 2 months before the election. So how on earth would you know what a candidate stands for and whether there's even a debate? How would you know who to vote for if you didn't really understand how the actual candidates compared and contrast with one another? So in Pennsylvania, State Representative Anthony DeLuca was elected despite being dead. And then the question was, well, why was he on the ballot? Well, listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. This underscores my point. DeLuca, who's 85, died a month before the Tuesday election. He died a month before the election, okay? Remember that in Pennsylvania, people had already been voting for a month before that. The guy dies, he's still on the ballot, and he wins. And so I must tell you that this is part of the problem. No, I know what you're going to say. Well, there's no way they could have replaced someone else on the ballot in a timely manner. How do you do that when he dies only a month before the election? It misses the point. We're supposed to have a day of election. And if you want to have a week before the election where you vote in person and then the day of, and then we know exactly who won the day of, that's fine. But nonetheless, it shows and illustrates how broken the Pennsylvania election system is. We have a clip from ABC News 27 in Pennsylvania talking about this race, and here it is.
A Pennsylvania Democrat won in a landslide victory, even though he's dead. State Representative Tony DeLuca, who represented the Pittsburgh suburbs for 39 years, died last month of cancer. His name was still on the ballot. He had no challenger. A Green Party candidate received some votes, but DeLuca won with 85% of the ballots counted. A special election will be called and take place to fill that vacancy.
So the Pennsylvania voters are so brilliant that they voted for a dead guy. He had been dead for a month before the election, and there was someone else on the ballot running against him. But they wanted the dead guy instead. That shouldn't come as a surprise, though, right? Because Pennsylvania elected Fetterman. They elected young Frankenstein, you know? I mean, remember Fetterman during the debate? We had that clip. Here it is. They elected this guy, too. Listen.
I do support fracking, and I support fracking, and I stand.
So, what's the difference between electing a dead man and electing Fetterman? You know, well, Fetterman, of course, will be a body, and he'll be able to be a reliable vote. But at some point, someone might actually have to vote for him, right? They may actually have to take his finger and push the button down, because I'm not even sure he can do that at this point. And he's just like young Frankenstein. So way to go, Pennsylvania, putting on the Ritz. Here it is. We've done this before. It's worth listening to.
If you're blue and you don't know where to go to, why don't you go where fashion sits?
That would be John Fetterman, of course. So look, When you have a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of voting before an election, and then you have states that can't seem to figure out who has won an election, especially when there are Republicans, and then you have days and days and days of counting the ballots. Obviously, ladies and gentlemen, there is an incredible problem. I mean, I know Tucker Carlson has spoken about this as well, but I'm really proud on this podcast that we have spoken about this at great length. And all of this seems so obvious, but it's very hard to overcome common sense when you have MSNBC and NBC and all the major news outlets saying that the only reason the Republicans don't like mail-in ballots is because they are election deniers, rather than actually addressing the true concerns that Republicans have with mail-in ballots, which is the broken chain of custody of when you fill out your ballot and you put it in a drop box, and then 2 or 3 other people may have touched your ballot before it even gets to the point where it is scanned in and counted, versus going to vote in person and filling out your ballot and scanning your ballot in yourself. And the chain of custody in that particular instance is never broken. That's what Republicans are concerned about. And I'm just flabbergasted that we have an inability to have a national dialogue about this. Because clearly, if we don't fix this, there will be, I believe at some point, civil unrest when people believe that elections are not fair and they are not free, because we can't seem to figure out who wins the night of the election. So the next up, podcast listeners, the CDC prefers pregnant people. Yes, you heard that correctly. Just when you thought it couldn't get weirder at the CDC, they have quietly replaced the term pregnant women with the woke gender-neutral term pregnant people. So the CDC has flu guidance. And flu guidance is, should you get this particular flu shot this year? Which flu shot is it? Which strain do we think is going to be prevalent this year? And who should get the flu shot? That's the guidance, right? Who should get it? And obviously, if you're pregnant, there are probably some restrictions depending on your health and other matters. But look, the CDC has changed the word pregnant women, changed the words pregnant women, that term, with pregnant people in all of their guidance. They never told anyone that they did it, but someone inside of the CDC noticed this and they put it out there. So there's this flu vaccine safety and pregnancy guidance Q&A card. It says, why should pregnant women get a flu shot? And all throughout, it's pregnant women, pregnant women, pregnant women. It's all like underlined in red in this article. And then they have the new card guidance, which is exactly the same as the other, same format, except that they have removed the words pregnant women with pregnant people throughout the entire thing. This is your CDC. This is your modern Democrat Party trying to confuse you, which I doubt that my listeners are confused, but I think they're certainly trying to confuse your children, because that's really what this is about. Corrupting and confusing children's minds. Naturally. I mean, why else would they do it? I mean, these are the same people that are telling you, don't worry about mass mail-in ballot voting. It's perfectly safe, 100% secure. And don't worry about pregnant people because, Pete Buttigieg's husband got pregnant and had twins. And if he can do it, anyone can. Can't make this stuff up. Next up, podcast listeners, satellite carbon trackers. I had to put this on the podcast today because I just can't believe it. So Al Gore and Google have backed a satellite database to track individual emitters of CO2. Think about this. Google, the massive company, and Al Gore are backing a satellite database to track the emitters of CO2. Former Vice President Al Gore and Google's nonprofit arm are funding Climate Trace, an environmentalist nonprofit coalition that uses a satellite database to track individual emitters of greenhouse gases around the world. Climate Trace aims to track emissions from energy producers and other large sources of CO2 to fill critical knowledge gaps for governments and international bodies that rely on a patchwork system to monitor carbon emissions, according to its website. The nonprofit coalition uses satellite imaging, remote sensors, and artificial intelligence to track greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generation, manufacturing, and road traffic. Quote, "This is a way for climate activists, the United Nations, and government bureaucrats to dig their claws into every aspect of industrial society by monitoring and penalizing producers," Mark Morano, publisher of Climate Depot and former staffer on the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. He said this to the Daily Caller Foundation. Quote, "They're demonizing emissions to create a net zero world where human prosperity and economic growth are evil." Well, of course. This is all being driven by the UN and the globalists. And everybody knows this. But what's remarkable is that modern technology, ladies and gentlemen, has enabled this massive surveillance state. And remember on a recent podcast when we were talking to you about how the USDA wants you to register your garden? It wasn't a requirement, but they're doing outreaches to the communities and asking you to register your garden. And that's part of that is your footprint, right? Your carbon footprint. Well, you got to make sure you grow the right crops. After all, if you're growing grain, it's probably for cattle. And we don't want you to be feeding cattle because of the flatulence. And we don't want you to be eating meat because we want to tell you that you shouldn't be able to do that. And we're tracking you with the Google tracking system because you are a big CO2 emitter. So modern technology has allowed for these things to actually happen. The question is, do we want them to happen? And I really think that's why we need to be talking about this. I mean, look, in Annapolis, where I serve as a legislator, there was this guy from Baltimore City. He was a doctor, a Johns Hopkins doctor, Johns Hopkins educated doctor. I mean, gotta love these guys too, because they all think that they are God's gift to the world, you know? I went to Johns Hopkins. I'm the smartest man in the room. That's the way this guy was too. And he actually put a bill in the Maryland legislature, because he himself was a legislator, put a bill in to measure your carbon footprint on your electric bill. So in other words, if you used X amount of electricity per month, then you would actually be given a carbon footprint score. So for every kilowatt hour, let's say you would get a 1 carbon footprint associated with that. If you used a lot of those, it would just keep adding up. And so I remember asking him, what is your intent of measuring individuals' carbon footprint? It's like we're talking about people's private residences. Why do you care how much electricity they use? And he was like, well, because I just think it's good information to know. You know, I mean, of course, this really arrogant, completely arrogant idiot who just always made it clear that he went to Johns Hopkins and he was smarter than everyone else, and he wanted to measure your carbon footprint because he thought he had the right to know how much electricity you used in the privacy of your own home. These are the same people now that want to track carbon from satellites. They want you to register your garden. They want you to stop eating meat. They want you to stop using leaf blowers because they're bad for the climate. Can't make this stuff up. It is true. And then Biden goes out there right before the election. And what does he say? He says he's going to shut down coal. Listen to this. We have the clip. Here it is.
So it's going to become a wind generation. And all they're doing is going to save them a hell of a lot of money, and using the same transmission line they transmitted the coal-fired electric on. We're going to be shutting these plants down all across America and having wind and solar.
So, look, it may be the policy of the Democrat Party that they want to shut down coal plants. That clearly is their policy. But it's never enough, because they want to now track all carbon from the sky. So they're going to be surveying from satellites your home, from the sky. They're going to be surveying your gardens. They're going to know how much food you're creating on your own property. They're going to be asking you how much electricity you use on your electricity bill. You know, how much do you spend? How much carbon are you emitting? Where are you buying your electricity from? That's why I have always opposed these policies, because the Democrat Party never knows when to stop. If they really wanted to fix carbon emissions, they would promote all forms of energy, and they would also fund, maybe through grants, okay? Innovation, right? Fine. Give universities, give private sector companies small grants to go and pursue new technologies that could replace and make cleaner our planet. I'm all for that, okay? Those are grants that I'm talking about. But then let the best technology win. That's not what the Democrats want. They want a complete and utter surveillance state, and they want to shut you down from being able to use any kind of power, as I see it, whatsoever, because they don't even want you to have a garden without them knowing what you have in your garden. It's really strange, this surveillance level that they're going to in the Democrat Party. Well, Joe Manchin obviously was absolutely upset at Joe Biden's comment about how he's going to shut down the coal plants. And so Senator Joe Manchin demanded President Joe Biden apologize, for promising, while on the campaign trail, to shut down coal plants all across America. His rebuke, Manchin's rebuke, comes just one day after Biden announced to a crowd in California that coal plants were too expensive to operate. The government doesn't operate coal plants, ladies and gentlemen. Coal plants are operated by companies that are owned by stockholders. So it's not the government's job to determine if coal plants are too expensive to operate. And so, of course, Biden is like, yes, and when we shut them down, the coal plants, we're going to replace them with wind and solar. And that's how we're going to generate our power. And of course, we see how that has worked for Germany and Europe. Now that they have been cut off from natural gas from Russia, they can't power their economies with solar and wind, can they? No, they can't. So Manchin was really upset over this. But the fact of the matter is, you have to ask yourself the question, well, then why is Manchin still a Democrat? If we have a United States Senate that's very likely to be 50-50 again, and which means that the Vice President of the United States casts the tie vote for everything, which means it's effectively controlled by the Democrats, then why doesn't Manchin step up to the plate and change his party affiliation and caucus with the Republicans so that the Republicans will control the Senate? I mean, nothing Biden has done, I believe, is consistent with what Manchin believes, except for one thing. Manchin really is a Democrat. He's just giving lip service to what the people of West Virginia want to hear. Oh, I'm really for coal. He's the bad guy. I'm not sure I buy it with Manchin. Because if he really wanted to talk about the power issue holistically, he would say, fine, innovation all day long, 100% for it, small grants. You know, let's put out 1,000 grants across the United States. 1,000 small grants to companies that want to innovate and create new ways of getting rid of CO2 emissions. But not to curb human activity, not to lessen our lifestyle. Find a way of making our way of living better and greater and more pleasant and more prosperous, more luxurious. That's not the Democrat way, though. Democrat way is to make you more miserable. Because if they can make you more miserable, ladies and gentlemen, if they can, then they can control you. Then you become dependent. And when you become dependent on the Democrat Party, you will be a Democrat forever, because that seems to be the way it works across the planet and throughout history. Marxism works when you can get people when you can disarm them and make them dependent. Why else would you want to track their emissions from space? I mean, once you track it and you learn it, what are you going to do about it? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fisher. We saw emissions coming from your chimney, and it appears that you were burning wood in your chimney to keep warm. Or you just wanted to have a nice fire in your family room, in your fireplace, while you watch TV, and we don't allow that anymore on the planet. You're not allowed to do that. So therefore, we're going to take your property from you, or we're going to put concrete in your chimney to prevent you from using it. I mean, when you think about it, what else are they going to do? If they're going to measure it and they're going to survey you, then obviously they're going to have massive penalties that they're going to put on you. That is the whole Democrat way. And we see this again and again. Everything they touch, they mess up. It never seems to end. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is legalizing public urination. That's right, you heard that correctly. Legalizing public urination in Washington, D.C. So, Washington, D.C. will not just be the U.S. capital, it will be the PP capital of the country. Yes, you heard that correctly. Washington, D.C. pushes to legalize public urination. With a city council vote impending, it appears that Washington, D.C. will soon legalize public urination while making criminal activity more feasible. This is true. Washington, D.C. wants to make it easier for criminals to steal, to break into stores, steal things, this kind of thing, looting. But at the same time, they want to make it also easier to just, pee wherever you want to pee. Front Page Magazine, according to Front Page Magazine, the criminal code of the city could be rewritten at a meeting next week under the guise of avoiding racism and discrimination of all types, including discrimination against those who commit crimes. The D.C. Council, quote, is expected to take the first of two votes next week on a massive rewrite of its criminal code. If passed, the bill would eliminate most mandatory minimum sentences, allow for jury trials in almost all misdemeanor cases. And by the way, if you know of anything about Washington, D.C., you can't get a fair jury, okay? Because you get a jury of like-minded thugs for the most part in Washington, D.C., and you're like, oh, well, he broke in and, he stole, $3,000 worth of jewelry. And the jury is like, it was only $3,000 worth of jewelry. And he stole it from somebody who is, a white supremacist. That's okay. Let him off. Can't make this stuff up. Really, this is the mentality in the city because of the Mayor Bowser of Washington, D.C. Crime should be treated the same, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, no matter who commits the crime. But unfortunately, this is the uneven nature of laws across our country. And this is Washington, D.C. And so, D.C. is going to become the PP capital of the country. And I'm not sure if any of you folks have walked down a road, a public road somewhere in a major city in America, almost always a blue city, by the way. And then suddenly you got this like massive whiff of urine. And you're just like completely grossed out. You're like, oh my God, It's not like one person peed here. It smells like 100 people peed here. And you walk by and you're holding your nose, and obviously it's incredibly unhealthy. It's very bad for human health. And you're walking through this area and you say to yourself, boy, they really need to do something about this. Not just clean it, but they need to actually, haul people in and penalize them for peeing in public. But DC, of course, wants to make it okay. So now, when you go visit the Washington Monument, you got to go to the bathroom. It's okay. Just pee right on the monument. You'll be fine. Nothing to worry about. So there's this fancy magazine in the greater Washington area called the Washingtonian magazine. Always well known for having high-end real estate, very expensive houses for sale, and stories of the rich and famous. The Washingtonian magazine has, under their news and politics section, an article titled, "Here are DC's top peeing in public spots." Here at Washingtonian, we are champions of public transparency. Democracy dies in darkness, as they say. To do our part, we use the Freedom of Information Act to learn where DC police have been issuing the most tickets for public urination. As a result, we now can reveal the district's top 3 hotspots for plein air peeing over the last 2 years. The top spot, 600 block of 8th Street Northwest, outside the Capital One Arena. So the Capital One Arena, ladies and gentlemen, I believe, isn't that where the Washington Wizards play? Yeah. So that's where the Washington Wizards play. So apparently there are lots of people outside the arena who decide to just pee right there on the sidewalk. Number 2, the 2400 block of 18th Street Northwest, outside a strip of bars in Adams Morgan. And next, number 3, 1700 block of DeSale Street Northwest, near DuPont Circle. So DuPont Circle was always traditionally a very wealthy area in Washington, D.C., and there still is incredibly pricey housing there, pricey apartments, fancy schmancy brownstones, this kind of thing. But there is also a massive, massive homeless population that lives in the park, which is like this circle, So it's like a circle where cars go around the circle. You have multiple exits and entrances. And the homeless people live there, so there's peeing and pooping everywhere in public. To be clear, it's not easy issuing very many tickets for urination. In the past 2 years, police have recorded just 29 instances of public urination or defecation. Okay, listen. In the past 2 years, it says in the Washingtonian magazine, police have only recorded instances, 29 of them, of public urination or defecation. Well, that's because there's not a cop there almost ever when there's someone peeing or pooping in public. So, of course, they're not there seeing the instance or writing. What are you supposed to do? Hello? You get your cell phone out. There's a guy peeing right on the sidewalk in open air. And then, the cop comes 5 minutes later and you're like, no, wait a minute. I'm walking down the block following him. Here I am now. I'm a block away from the original situation. And then the cop was, it's just ridiculous. So they're making it sound, the Washingtonian, as if this isn't a big deal because there only have been 29 instances of public urination or defecation that have been recorded. So in other words, its data only shows 29 incidents. But we know in this city, any reasonable person can drive through Washington, D.C. and see there's a massive problem with public urination and public defecation. And now, of course, you can do it without consequence in Washington, D.C. Now the tourists can see you taking a dump right on the Washington Mall, which is that big open space where the Washington Monument is located, and the Lincoln Memorial, or pee, or whatever you want to do. Another man, according to the Washingtonian, police say they caught peeing near DuPont Circle, was apparently talking on his cell phone while publicly relieving himself, all within 10 feet of a police vehicle, when the officer ambled over to ask the man for his ID. The man claimed to be from outside the district, according to the report. Marylanders and Virginians take note. That did not spare the man a ticket. Another man who cops said peed in an alley by Capital One Arena inspired some evocative description from the police. He was described as urinating on a red brick wall with his right hand down his crotch. The officer noticed a stream of liquid emanating from the man's crotch area. The liquid was splashing across the wall and spilling onto the ground. On most of these reports, the victim is listed as public society. That's weird. Unfortunately, no more details on the intrepid soul who peed right near the Cheesecake Factory by the White House was reported. So, ladies and gentlemen, Washington, D.C. will now say that you can pee anywhere you want in public without consequence. And therefore, what a great place to live, right? Unbelievable. And that is the dumbest bill in America. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.